In 1542, a Spanish expedition led by Francisco de Orellana floated down the length of the Amazon River and reported something no one back in Europe believed. Cities, not villages. Cities strung along the riverbanks for miles, with roads leading inland and farmland feeding what his chronicler put at hundreds of thousands of people. For the next 400 years, historians called him a liar. There were no ruins to find. The jungle had swallowed everything, and the soil there is some of the poorest farmland on the planet. A region like that could not have fed cities. Except Orellana was telling the truth, and the proof is still in the ground. Buried beneath those old settlements is a layer of black, fertile earth that has held its nutrients for more than 2,000 years through some of the heaviest rainfall on Earth, with no one tending it. The people who made it are gone, but the soil they built is still working, and the thing they made it with costs about $2 a pound today. To see why that should be impossible, look at the rainforest itself. It appears to be the richest place on Earth, but the ground underneath it is not. Almost all of the nutrients are held in the living plants, not the soil. When a leaf falls, it is broken down and pulled back into the canopy within days, so the dirt below stays thin and acidic. Clear the trees, and what is left bakes into red clay that washes away in the first hard rain. This is why slash and burn farming there wears out a plot in 2 or 3 years. So, when naturalists in the late 1800s noticed patches of deep black soil near old settlement sites, it stood out. The local name was Terra Preta de Indio, the dark earth of the Indians. The patches turn up across the basin, some several feet deep, thick with broken pottery left by the people who lived there. Late in the 20th century, archaeologists working those sites found the evidence that finally settled Orellana's account, pointing to dense populations living in one place for centuries. Dig a hole in the ordinary jungle floor, and you hit pale, lifeless clay. Dig a few feet away in the dark earth, and you find soil that is deep, black, and full of life. Same rainfall, same climate, and completely different ground. The first careful study came in 1966, when a Dutch soil scientist named Wim Sombroek published a book called Amazon Soils. When later researchers carbon dated the black material inside terra preta, they expected ordinary decomposed compost. Instead, the carbon was thousands of years old and not breaking down. Normal organic matter rots, and this had outlasted entire civilizations because the dark earth was never compost in the first place. It was charcoal, made on purpose and worked into the soil. Today it has a name, biochar, and that single word leaves an obvious question. What is charcoal actually doing down there, and why does it last so long? Picture wood burning in an open campfire. With plenty of air, it burns all the way down. The carbon leaves as smoke, and you are left with a little ash that does almost nothing for soil. Biochar is what happens when you change one thing. Heat the same wood or plant material to a few hundred degrees, but starve it of oxygen so it cannot fully burn. The process is called pyrolysis. The gases cook off, but the rigid carbon skeleton of the plant survives, locked into stable structures that soil microbes cannot easily eat. That is why it can sit underground for centuries, while ordinary compost would have rotted in a season. What you end up with behaves nothing like ash. It is a structure full of holes. That structure is the entire point. A single gram of good biochar holds somewhere between 200 and 400 square meters of internal surface area, roughly the floor of a tennis court, folded into a crumb you could pinch between 2 fingers. The reason that matters comes down to what actually lives in soil. Fertility is not really about the dirt. It is about the living things in the dirt. Bacteria and fungi are what unlock nutrients and hand them to plant roots, and they are fragile. Heavy rain flushes them out, and sunlight kills them. They do best when they can settle into protected spaces and build stable colonies. Biochar is, in effect, housing. Fungi thread through its tunnels while bacteria coat the inner walls. So organisms that would have washed straight through sandy soil suddenly have a permanent address. The pores also hold water, which is why biochar-rich soil rides out dry spells better than the ground beside it. This is the distinction that changes everything. Biochar does not feed the soil. It houses the things that feed the soil. A bag of synthetic fertilizer feeds plants directly, gives a fast spike, then runs out, which is why you buy it every season. Biochar works the other way. Once a microbial community settles into the pores, it stays. And from there, fungi reach minerals that roots alone could never touch, while bacteria pull nitrogen straight out of the air, with no bag involved. So, if the science is settled, and it is, why is there no biochar aisle at the hardware store? Follow the money, starting at the garden center. The global fertilizer market is worth more than $200 billion a year, and the entire model rests on one assumption. Soil is a dead container. You pour in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Take out a harvest, the soil empties, and you buy more next spring. American history shows where that choice came from. In the 1930s, the topsoil of the Great Plains dried out and blew into the sky. The Dust Bowl buried farms and drove families off their land. When that soil came back into use, the market chose to feed the plants from a bag rather than rebuild the biology underground. Chemistry won out over biology, and it has held that lead ever since. Biochar does not compete on those terms. Think of it as a one-time renovation, rather than a refill. The benefits build over years and the need for outside inputs drops, which, from a business standpoint, is the wrong kind of product. A purchase that slowly makes the customer need you less is the opposite of how these companies stay alive. This is not a conspiracy. Research money simply flows toward things that sell again next year. The research exists anyway. In 2025, a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences pooled 438 studies from around the world. It found long-term biochar use raised crop yield by about 11% and raised the soil's stored carbon by more than half. A single dose tends to fade, but repeated steady use compounds year after year. And paired with ordinary fertilizer, separate global reviews put the yield gain as high as 48% over untreated land. Yield is only one part of this. When crop waste is burned or left to rot, it releases methane and nitrous oxide, both far more potent than carbon dioxide. Turning that waste into biochar flips the equation. The same 2025 review found biochar cut methane from soil by about 14% and nitrous oxide by about 21%, while locking carbon underground for centuries. There is a benefit closer to home as well. A century of industry and leaded gasoline has left heavy metals like lead and cadmium in soil near old houses and busy roads, and these can move quietly into the roots of vegetables. Biochar's huge internal surface binds many of these metals and holds them in place, making them far less available to plant roots. It also steadies acidic soil, where lime has to be reapplied again and again because the correction keeps slipping, holding the pH in a workable range for years instead of months. Which leaves the practical question: how does any of this get into a garden bed? And what is the mistake that ruins it for almost every beginner? Walk into most garden centers and ask for biochar, and you will get a blank look. The few that stock it sell small bags for $25 to $35, but bought in bulk, the same material runs closer to $2 a pound. You can also make it from yard waste with a cone-shaped pit. Dig a shallow cone, build a hot fire of dry wood, and once you have a strong bed of glowing coals, feed in dry material like wood scraps, plant stalks, and nutshells. The goal is charring, not burning, so restrict the air just enough that the material blackens and smokes without bursting into open flame. Then douse everything with water. Never use painted, glued, or pressure-treated lumber, because heating it releases chemicals you do not want near food. Now the mistake almost everyone makes with the raw black char. It should never go straight into the soil. Fresh biochar is bone dry and completely vacant, and dropped into a bed in that state it behaves like a sponge, pulling nitrogen and water away from your plants. The garden looks worse for weeks, so people try it once, watch their plants suffer, and decide the whole idea is a myth. It works. They simply skip the one step that makes it work. Charging is simple and old. Mix the raw char into finished compost or aged manure, or soak it in compost tea and leave it for 2 to 4 weeks. The pores fill with microbes and nutrients, so when it reaches the garden, it is already alive. The first season or two may feel slow while the network builds, but steady use compounds, and once it is established, it does not wash away. The permanence is what sets this apart from everything else in the garden. The civilizations that built the dark earth are gone. Their cities fell back under the canopy, and their languages and daily lives dissolved into history. The soil they prepared is still there, still dark, still feeding plants 2,000 years later. They did not last through monuments. They lasted because they changed the chemistry of the ground under their feet, and the ground kept the record. Every handful of charged biochar worked into a bed is a small version of that same act. It costs about $2. It stores carbon, and it slowly cuts a garden's dependence on products sold by the season. The only real reason more people have not heard of it is that almost no one profits from selling something once. If this was worth your time, please consider liking and subscribing, as this helps us make more videos like these in the future.